Did you read the question? Zadie. Primary. Good. Kingston. Secondary. So, primary resources are created by people who were at the event. We see a lot of primary and secondary sources in history. Because in order to say that something happened, we have to prove it, right? We have to say, yes, we know it happened because of this. Let me finish this. When we get to the textbook, you'll go downstairs because we have like 5 minutes. So primary sources were created by by a person who was actually at the historical event. Like the examples they gave, a speech. Well, a speech is given by a person who is living through that speech, right? They don't write a speech for somebody to say 50 years from now, and nobody hears it in the meantime. Photographs. Can you take a photo? Can I take a photo of a real life dinosaur that's alive? No, because I'm not alive with dinosaurs. But if I was in New York City on September 11th, could I take a picture of what the World Trade Center looked like after the planes had hit? I could. So a photograph is only able to be taken by a person who's actually there. Photographs can only be primary resources. Letters. Well, say I'm living during the Revolutionary War and I'm writing a letter to my family member in England about what's going on. Well, I can actually see it. I'm living there. It's happening now. So that would be a primary source. Focus. Secondary sources are written after the event happened. So the person did not live through it, but they've read about it somewhere, so now they're writing about it. Like textbooks. Did our textbook authors live when Henry Hudson first explored the northeastern United States? No. Were our textbook authors actually there during the Industrial Revolution? No. So that's why textbooks are secondary sources. Encyclopedias are secondary sources because every single article in an encyclopedia was somebody there watching that event happen. No. And then writing about it. But if we look at our textbook, we do see a lot of primary sources. We see photographs of historical events. We see, I think there was an example where we saw a picture of the Declaration of Independence, which is a primary source. So like it said, secondary sources a lot of times talk about primary sources. So remember, primary sources are created by a person who actually lived through the event. Secondary sources are created after the event happened. The person who created it was not there, they did not live through it, they're writing it 1 week later, 1 year later, 100 years later. Okay, so now go ahead and open your textbook to page 302, I think. And open your vocab notebooks to the chapter 4, lesson 3 words. You're just adding these to chapter 4, lesson 3.
332.
What is it?
132.
132. Sorry. 132 is the correct page. Read page 132 to yourself. Write the vocab, add it to the chapter 4, lesson 3. And then read the caption at the bottom and look at all of those pictures and diagrams across the whole bottom, the bottom of page 132 and 133. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to read page 132, study the caption to all of those objects, those things at the bottom, and then try those practice questions. In 10 minutes, we're going to answer them together. So go. Okay, so everybody should already have their name, number, and date at the top. And then now read the directions with me. Decide whether each of the items below is a primary or secondary source. Write P for a primary source or S for a secondary source in the space provided. So you need to look and you need to decide, is it a primary source? Did a person who was at the historical event create that source? Or is it a secondary source? Did a person who lived years later or just maybe at the same time but did not live through that event create the source? So let's do number 1 and number 2 together. Number 1, an encyclopedia entry about the Northeast. Think about the person who wrote that encyclopedia entry of the Northeast. Were they there writing everything that happened in the Northeast forever? Mason. So is that a primary or secondary source? Secondary. Now number 2, the diary of Thomas Edison. Well, remember, a diary is something you write about your life. You write a little bit, like you write what happened that day in your life. Would you write a diary entry about somebody else's life? No, then it's not a diary entry anymore. So the diary of Thomas Edison, which would mean in order for it to be a primary source, Thomas Edison would have had to have written it. Did Thomas Edison write the diary of Thomas Edison? Aaron? Yes. So is the diary of Thomas Edison a primary or secondary source? Primary. There you go. Okay, at 2:20 we will discuss. Okay, so everybody should be looking at pages 132 and 133. Let's look at the bottom of page 132. We have 3 primary sources. We have a photograph. Again, is it possible to take a photograph of something if you aren't there? No. So if it's a photograph, well, yeah, that person was definitely there. So it is a primary source. B is money. You may have thought, how is that a primary source? Well, it's a primary source because would you use money from a long time ago now? When do you use money? Do I get something now and then pay for it 50 years from now? No. When do I use money? Zadie?
In the current time.
In the current time, right when you want to buy that thing. And then C is a list of toll rates. So that means this is how much the tolls cost. And if you look really closely, you would be able to see a date. Now, do you think that toll rates, the prices to pay to go on the Erie Canal, is the same now as it was back in the 1800s? Smith? No, probably not, because think about the prices of everything. What has happened to the prices of things as time goes? Zari?
It's gotten higher.
It's gotten higher. Things get more expensive as time goes on, partially because we make more money as time goes on. So that means it has to be a primary source, because could we take this list of toll rates right here to the Erie Canal now and say, I'm going to pay this much? Or are they going to be like, that's how much it cost in 1892. You have to pay 2021 prices. Colin?
It's going to be, you have to pay.
Yeah, they're going to say that's old, that's not current. So it has to be a primary source because they're using it right then. The people who work at the Erie Canal in this time are creating it. The people who are traveling on the Erie Canal at that current time are using it. Then if we look at page 133, we have secondary sources. A painting. Now, yes, I could sit and watch the Erie Canal being built and paint it as I'm sitting there, but I could also paint a picture of the Erie Canal being built right now, couldn't I? And was I at the building of the Erie Canal in the 18 and 1900s? No. So they're telling us that this painting is a secondary source, which means, was the painter watching this happen when he or she painted it? No. It means maybe they saw a photograph, maybe somebody told them about it, and they painted what they thought it looked like. Then we have E, which is a website about the Erie Canal. Think of all the websites, like when you were researching your president. Did somebody who was alive during your president's time create that website? No, most of your presidents were alive before the internet even existed. So websites are most often secondary sources. Somebody studied about the Erie Canal and then created a website based on what they learned. And then F, we have a book about the Erie Canal. Do you think that the people who were there when the Erie Canal was built and have been there the whole time to tell you the whole history up to now are the ones who wrote that book? No. So it's a secondary source. So now let's answer number 1. How are items A and D different? So A is that photograph of the Erie Canal. D is the painting of the Erie Canal. How are they different? I'm going to pick sticks. Put everyone back in. Kingston, how are A and D different?
One is a photograph, one is a painting.
One's a photograph, one is a painting. How does that make them different? How else are they different?
One of them was made. That one that you
So one was made when the Erie Canal was being built, okay?
and the other one was probably made later.
And the other was made later. Very good. Number 2, which sources show objects that people actually used for traveling on the Erie Canal? So which letters show sources that people actually used for traveling on the Erie Canal? Lena,
Boats and like ferries.
tell me the letters. Which sources, so A, B, C, D, or E, or F, show objects that people actually used for traveling on the Erie Canal?
B, C, and D.
Well, B, because they had to pay money to go on the Erie Canal. C, because they had to look at the toll list to know how much they had to pay. But how did they use E if they were traveling the Erie Canal?
I said D.
Oh, well, D, how did they use a painting?
Because it says traveling, and I was just saying that they can like travel.
Well, is a painting an object that they would need?
No.
No. So did they need a painting?
No.
So which objects did they need? Or did they use?
B and C.
B and C, the money and the list of toll rates. Yes.
In my book, B is a lantern.
Some of you, okay, I didn't know, mine's a lantern too. Some of you had a lantern, some of you had money for B. But still, would they need a lantern to travel the Erie Canal back then? Yeah. It'd be the same thing, because did they have electricity back when the Erie Canal was first built? No. So what did they needed light? Did they only travel it during the day? No. Sometimes it took all night to get down it. Number 3, why might secondary sources E and F also be considered primary sources? I'm going to open that up to volunteers. How could E and F also be a primary source? Carla.
E can be a primary source.
So a website. How can a website be a primary source?
Because maybe who wrote the website had like a friend or somebody else who was in the old time.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. If I have a family member who lived through an event and I write about their experience, is that my experience?
No.
No. So would that be a primary source if I wrote about my family members or my friends' experience? Focus. Not you, Carla. Because there was a question like this, and I noticed a lot of people get it wrong. So if I made a website about my family member's experience, is that a primary or a secondary source? And why? Michaela, why is it a secondary source? Was I there if I'm writing about my family members? No. So how could a website also be a primary source? Smith.
Someone might have written the website in a book many years ago when it was built, and people have just updated it.
Well, you can't write a website. Let me tell you, you guys are not thinking. If I create a website about ICCS, I'm here. I'm seeing what's happening. So is that a primary or secondary source? Class?
Primary.
Primary. If I write a book about myself, I'm living my own life. Is that a primary or secondary source?
Primary.
Primary. That's it. So if a person is creating a website about an event they actually went through or about themselves, well, then it's a primary source. It's not a secondary source anymore. They lived through it, and they're writing about their experience. Same with the book. If I was at the event or I'm writing it about myself, well, then it's a primary source because I lived through it. I did what it said. Now, without you guys having it, we're going to go through the answers. Number 3. A drawing of what your friend saw on a visit to Philadelphia. Is that a primary or secondary source? Aaron. Secondary source. Why is a drawing of what my friend saw on a trip to Philadelphia a secondary source? If I drew a picture of what my friend saw, why is that a secondary source?
Because you draw it and you were the person who did it.
I drew it and I wasn't the person there. I didn't see it. I just drew a picture of what they saw. Number 4, an interview with Alexander Graham Bell about his invention. Is that a primary or secondary source? Carla.
That will be a secondary source because
Nope. What is an interview? Zadie.
An interview is when somebody sits down with another person and asks them questions.
Okay. So if it's an interview with Alexander Graham Bell, who were they probably talking about? Zadie? Alexander Graham Bell. If Alexander Graham Bell is there answering questions about himself, is it a primary or secondary source? Primary. Whew, there's only 10 questions, which means if you get one wrong, it's automatically a 90. 2 is automatically an 80. You got to think. That's it. That's all there is to it. Number 5. A newspaper article about the history of a local textile mill. Is that secondary or primary? Zari, please take that background off because I can't see you. I asked you that earlier. Lena.
Secondary.
Secondary. Why is it secondary?
Because you weren't there, you just wrote the website.
I wasn't there. It's a newspaper article. I wasn't there for the whole history of the textile factory. I wasn't there from the very beginning to where it is now. I'm writing about what other people saw, what other people told me about, and then adding in maybe a little of what I saw. Number 6, a painting of George Washington made in 2006. Primary or secondary? Victoria. Secondary. Why?
Because
He didn't live in 2006. If I made the painting back in 1776 with him right in front of me, well then yeah, that would be primary. But if I'm making the painting in 2006, I'm not going off of his actual face. I'm going off of what I've seen in other paintings.
Like maybe you went on a website.
Exactly. Number 7, the autobiography of an immigrant to New York City. Primary or secondary? This is real sad. Smith.
Primary.
Primary. Why is it primary?
Because an autobiography is a biography that someone wrote about themselves.
Good. How many times have I said that in this classroom? A lot. A lot. And yet I think, well, obviously only Smith was the only one who was listening all those times. Number 8, a magazine article about the Industrial Revolution. Primary or secondary? Kingston. Secondary. Why? I can't hear you.
Well, because they weren't there.
The author was not there. They didn't have magazines during the Industrial Revolution. They had newspapers, but not magazines. Number 9, a letter from an immigrant to her family in France. Primary or secondary? Cullen.
It is a primary
Why is it primary?
because it's a girl that's in. I forgot
Just
there's a girl in the thing, and she's telling her family members what's going on.
there. She's telling her family members back in France about what's going on right now. When you write a letter, do you spend the whole thing talking about something that you've never even experienced? No. Number 10, a story about settlers in your social studies book. Mason. Secondary. Why? Come on, you got to be able to put your thinking into words. Who can help him out? Zari. Why is it secondary?
Because the social studies book, they weren't there, or
Yes.
they got it from somewhere.
The authors of our social studies book were definitely not around when the settlers were around. Okay, go ahead and close your social studies book and put it away.